The scorching sun hung like a molten coin above the remote outpost of Firebase Echo, turning the Afghan mountains into a shimmering wall of heat and stone. Inside the command bunker, the air conditioning wheezed against the desert furnace while warning displays flashed across surveillance monitors. The scent of gun oil and instant coffee hung heavy in the recycled air. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant Mira Patel clutched her tactical tablet against her chest, her badge reading Combat Medic in faded letters. The data on her screen showed something that made her stomach tighten. Not random chatter, something far worse. A coordinated pattern of enemy movements that didn't match any standard insurgent tactics she'd seen in her 3 tours. "The perimeter breach will come from the North Ridge," she said, stepping forward toward the cluster of officers arguing around the central display. "They're setting up a pincer movement too. We're not playing guessing games today." "Thanks." Captain Reynolds cut her off without turning around. His tone wasn't cruel, just dismissive, like brushing lint from his uniform. "We've got tactical specialists analyzing the situation." Behind him, Lieutenant Davis glanced at Myra's badge and smirked. The walking weakness strikes again. "Just let her bandage knees where she belongs." The other officers chuckled. Someone muttered, "She always shows up when trouble's brewing." Like a bad omen, Mira's fingers tightened on her tablet. She'd seen this pattern before, not in any field manual or training simulation, but in her own research. The tactical analysis method she'd developed during her first tour, the one they'd dismissed during personnel reassignments. They'd called it too theoretical, too academic, not viable for practical combat situations. But now those same patterns were unfolding across the mountainside, creating a perfect storm that threatened to overwhelm their undermanned outpost. The base's entire defensive strategy had been compromised, and not one of these glory-chasing officers could see what was right in front of them. "I think you need to check the northern approach," Mira tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "The pattern matches something from my analysis of the Kandahar ambush last spring." Captain Reynolds finally turned around, his face flushed with frustration. "Patel, I don't know what fairy tales you've been reading in your little medical tent, but we've got real problems here. Why don't you go restock some bandages or something useful?" The room erupted in laughter. Lieutenant Davis added, "Maybe she can kiss our boo-boos when this is over. Lord knows she's got plenty of time on her hands." Myra felt heat creep up her neck, but she kept her expression neutral. These men had never bothered to learn that. Before joining the Army as a medic, she'd completed advanced degrees in behavioral analysis and tactical prediction. To them, she was just a quiet woman who appeared when soldiers were injured, spoke medical jargon they didn't understand, and disappeared back into the forgotten corners of the base. What they didn't know was that she'd predicted half the enemy movements that had endangered their troops over the past 6 months. What they couldn't see was that their entire firebase was about to collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. "Yes, sir," Myra said quietly, tucking the tablet under her arm. "I'll check our medical supplies." She turned and walked toward the exit, her boots silent on the dusty floor. Behind her, the arguments resumed, voices rising as the officers demanded answers from intelligence specialists who had no idea what they were looking for. The warning displays continued their frantic flashing, and somewhere in the mountains surrounding Firebase Echo, enemy forces moved into position like patient predators. Mira descended the narrow service path toward the medical bunker, where the wounded lived and died under her care. The walls vibrated with the distant thump of artillery, and dust gathered in the sandbag barriers like snow on abandoned fences. This was her domain, the place where broken soldiers came to be mended by hands they dismissed until they needed them. She paused at a lookout point and gazed across the valley. Jagged mountains rose like teeth against the harsh blue sky, hiding countless caves and ridgelines where enemies could hide. Millions of dollars of the world's most advanced surveillance equipment, rendered helpless by men who couldn't see beyond their own preconceptions. A threat they couldn't recognize because it came from a direction they refused to consider. At the end of the path, Mira stopped at a sealed storage unit marked Restricted Medical Supplies. She pressed her palm against the warm metal and smiled for the first time that day. Let them blame faulty intelligence and atmospheric interference. Let them call in their special tactics teams and their emergency protocols. She had work to do. The secondary communications vault beneath the medical bunker felt like a tomb. Concrete walls sweated with condensation, and the only light came from a bank of emergency LEDs that hummed with irregular rhythm. Mira sealed the access hatch behind her and breathed in the familiar smell of electronic components and stale air. This was where forgotten equipment came to die. She pulled out a stack of topographical maps marked with red ink, each one documenting the enemy movement patterns she'd been tracking for the past month. The top sheet showed a time series analysis from 3 days prior, the exact moment when their security systems had started missing crucial details. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mira clipped a transparency overlay to the map and held it up to the light. The pattern was unmistakable. A perfect tactical deployment that curved too precisely, moved too methodically, and repeated with mathematical precision. It wasn't random insurgent activity or tribal conflicts. It was a coordinated assault preparing to happen. She walked to the backup communications terminal, mounted on the far wall, and keyed in her medical access code. The screen flickered to life, displaying a field of standard monitoring feeds. With practiced fingers, she navigated to an archive directory labeled Tactical Prediction Models. The folder had been marked for deletion 6 months ago, but Mira had hidden copies in 3 different locations throughout the base's network. She'd known this day would come, the day when their precious automated surveillance would fail, and they'd need someone who understood the older, more reliable ways of doing things. The prediction algorithm appeared on screen. It's elegant. Parameters scrolling past like poetry. Mira had designed it to map enemy movement patterns using behavioral analysis to identify preparation for attacks. It was brilliant, innovative, and absolutely terrifying to military brass who preferred their warfare predictable and controllable. Too theoretical, she whispered, mimicking Captain Reynolds' dismissive tone. Too academic. But theoretical meant thoughtful. Academic meant thorough. And right now, while their digital systems chased obvious decoys in the south, her analysis was the only thing that could save them from the northern attack. Mira pulled out the base's defensive asset registry and flipped through pages of active deployments. Every combat team, every heavy weapon, every drone, all of them were focused on the southern approach where minimal enemy activity served as perfect bait. Everything except one defense system. Her finger stopped halfway down the page. An entry marked MSPAD Anti-Personnel System. The notation beside it read, Mothballed hardware, manual targeting only. This particular defense platform had been deemed too outdated, too unreliable for modern warfare. Its systems were analog, its targeting manual. Its entire operation depended on human skill rather than computer assistance. In other words, it was perfect. Mira circled the location, code in red ink, and folded the page. She'd trained on the MSPAD during her orientation, back when the Army still believed in teaching soldiers to rely on their instincts rather than algorithms. The brass had retired it because it couldn't interface with their precious networked systems, but that also meant it couldn't be fooled by the enemy's deception. She gathered her materials, the movement analysis charts, the topographical overlay, the technical manual for the MSPAD, and tucked them into her medical pack. The vault surveillance system had been malfunctioning for the past 3 months, ever since Mira had quietly rerouted its primary feed. Amazing how many small system failures went unnoticed when you worked in the forgotten corners of a sprawling military installation. The corridor outside was empty. Mira's footsteps echoed softly as she made her way toward the northern defensive position. She knew every pathway, every bunker, every forgotten corner of this base, while the officers navigated by GPS and digital maps. She'd learned these spaces the old-fashioned way, by walking them, memorizing them, making them part of her mental landscape. At the junction near the fuel depot, she paused beside an ammunition crate, vibrating with the percussion of distant artillery. The rhythm was too steady, too regular. Another sign of the enemy's deception, keeping the southern bombardment precisely timed to appear threatening while masking their true intentions. The pattern was spreading. Soon, it would culminate in a massive assault from the north, creating an attack so complex that even scrambling their remaining forces wouldn't stop it. The base would be overrun, its personnel trapped in a maze of enemy fire unless someone broke the pattern from outside the system. Mira removed her hand from the crate and continued down the corridor. Behind her, the artillery continued its steady rhythm, patient, relentless, and utterly predictable, just like the men who dismissed her warnings and laughed at her expertise. But she wasn't laughing anymore. The emergency briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as Captain Reynolds paced in front of a wall-mounted display showing the southern approaches. Mira stood near the back, her presence barely acknowledged by the assembled officers and team leaders. She'd been called in as an afterthought, someone to patch up the wounded when the real warriors had finished their fight. "Gentlemen," Reynolds began, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, "we're looking at a sustained artillery barrage from the south. Every surveillance system confirms enemy concentration in these 3 sectors. I want defensive teams redeployed immediately." Lieutenant Davis leaned forward. "Sir, pattern analysis suggests a major push coming. Could be 100 fighters, maybe more. We're moving heavy weapons to the south wall and calling for air support." "How long?" Reynolds demanded. "Minimum 2 hours, sir. Maybe 3 if weather holds." Mira stepped forward. "Captain, I've been analyzing the movement patterns, and I thought I made it clear that we don't need input from medical staff right now." Reynolds cut her off, face reddening. "This is a tactical situation requiring combat expertise." "But sir, the pattern indicates a feint in the south, while the main force, the south wall, is under fire right now." "Patel," Reynolds snapped, "I don't know what fantasy you've been entertaining, but this is real combat, not some academic exercise." The room fell silent. Mira felt 20 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting for her to retreat back to her corner like a scolded child. The heat in her face spread down her neck, but she held her ground. "Sir, with respect, I've studied enemy tactics in this region for 3 years. I understand how they work, and I know how to." Reynolds laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You studied enemy tactics? Patel, you're a combat medic. You patch wounds and distribute medicine. You're not qualified to comment on tactical operations." Lieutenant Davis joined in the laughter. "Next, she'd be telling us she can man the heavy weapons too. Maybe she can stop this attack with her magic prediction skills." Another officer chimed in. "Wave her hands and make all the bad guys go away." Mira's hands clenched into fists at her sides. 3 years of condescension, dismissal, and casual humiliation crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. These men had no idea who she was or what she was capable of. They saw her gender, her medical insignia, her quiet demeanor, and dismissed everything else. "The main attack will come from the North Ridge within 30 minutes, she said quietly. "When it does, you'll lose not just the Firebase, but every man stationed here. This artillery is a distraction." Reynolds' laughter died. "Are you threatening us, Patel?" "I'm warning you, sir. The real assault force is already in position. Soon, they'll overrun our northern defenses while all our weapons face south. This isn't just about tactics anymore. The room erupted in angry voices. Someone accused her of hysteria. Another suggested she was trying to scare them into listening to her. Lieutenant Davis stood up, his face flushed with indignation. "This is exactly why women don't belong in forward bases," he declared. "They get emotional, make wild claims, try to insert themselves into situations they don't understand. Patel, you're out of line and out of your depth." Mira looked around the room at the assembled faces, angry, dismissive, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. Not one of them had bothered to examine her analysis. Not one had asked to see the data she'd compiled. They'd already decided she was wrong because she was inconvenient. "I see," she said quietly. "Well, gentlemen, I hope you're tactical specialists. Find a solution, because if they don't, this base will be overrun within the hour." She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind her, Captain Reynolds called out, "Patel, you're confined to the medical bunker until further notice. And I'm recommending you for psychological evaluation." Mira paused at the door but didn't turn around. "Yes, sir. I'll be at the northern perimeter if you need me." She left them arguing among themselves, their voices rising in panic and recrimination. The corridor outside felt cool and peaceful after the toxic atmosphere of the briefing room. Mira walked slowly, her mind already calculating trajectories and timing windows. They'd given her 30 minutes before the attack began. More than enough time to prove exactly who was out of their depth. The abandoned weapons cache stretched out like a forgotten graveyard, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow. Mira stood before the covered form of the MEMSPAD defense system, her flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. The tarp covering. The weapon was military green, faded to the color of dying grass, and when she pulled it away, the system beneath looked like a sleeping dragon. Unlike the sleek computer-dependent defense platforms dominating the southern wall, the MEMSPAD had the angular, purposeful lines of an earlier generation. Every component was functional, every part accessible to human hands and human understanding. This was a weapon built for soldiers who trusted their instincts more than their targeting computers. Mira ran her hand along the housing, feeling the slight warmth retained from the day's heat. The maintenance log, tucked into a pocket beside. The targeting system showed regular inspections, but no operational hours in the past 8 months. The brass had mothballed it, not because it was broken, but because it couldn't be integrated into their network-dependent defense doctrine. Perfect. She climbed onto the firing platform and settled into the gunner's seat with the familiar comfort of an old friendship. The controls were manual levers and mechanical switches, not digital displays and touchscreens. The technical manual, dog-eared and annotated with handwritten notes, lay in the side compartment where the last operator had left it. Mira began the startup sequence from memory, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Power systems, hydraulic pressure, targeting optics, ammunition feed. Each component responded with the solid reliability of mechanical engineering. No wireless protocols, no network dependencies, no digital vulnerabilities. The system came online with a satisfying series of clicks and hums. The heads-up display flickered to life, showing basic targeting information in amber phosphor text. The radio crackled once, then settled into the steady hiss of empty frequencies. She reached into her pack and pulled out the tactical prediction model she'd retrieved from the vault. The small device looked like an outdated GPS unit, its surface scarred from years of handling. Mira connected it to the MEMSPAD's auxiliary input and watched as lines of code scrolled across the secondary display. The prediction algorithm uploaded in seconds, its elegant mathematics translating into targeting parameters and threat assessments. The system didn't reject it. It couldn't reject it because the MEMSPAD's operating system predated all the security restrictions that had been added to newer weapons. Mira smiled. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways. She activated the weapon's targeting systems and began the threat identification sequence. The prediction model pulsed once on the status display, a brief flash of coded information that would be invisible to the base's surveillance network. As far as the digital systems were concerned, the MSPAD didn't exist. The northern defense bunker's observation slits opened with the grinding of gears and pulleys. Mira had activated them using maintenance codes she'd memorized during her first month on the base. The mountain air flowed into the space, carrying the scent of pine and distant smoke. Through the opening, she could see the base's main complex lit up like a festival, every building blazing with lights as personnel rushed to reinforce the southern wall. Emergency strobes flashed as vehicles raced between positions carrying troops and ammunition. They were losing the battle before it had even begun. The tactical prediction model had mapped enemy movements with mathematical precision, creating a pattern so complex that conventional surveillance couldn't even identify its existence. Soon the real attack would begin, not from the south where all their weapons pointed, but from the north where the firebase lay exposed and vulnerable. Mira swung the MSPAD toward the northern ridgeline, its hydraulics humming with restrained power. The weapon felt solid beneath her hands, responsive to her touch in ways that the computer-targeted systems never could. This was defense at its purest form, human skill merged with mechanical precision. She paused at the defensive position, looking out at the darkening mountains. Somewhere in the command center, Captain Reynolds was probably screaming at his officers, demanding updates on the southern approach. Lieutenant Davis was likely directing troops to unnecessary positions, wasting precious resources on a threat that existed only as a distraction. None of it would work. The enemy's deception had evolved beyond their ability to understand or counter it. Like a virus spreading through the base's defensive strategy, it would continue growing until the entire firebase collapsed into chaos. Unless someone attacked it from outside the system. Mira powered up the MSPAD's targeting optics and scanned the northern ridge. The weapon's independence from the base's surveillance network meant she was seeing the terrain with fresh eyes, unbiased by the false data feeding into the command center systems. The Firebase communication network was probably trying to recall her, but the MSPAD's radio was tuned to frequencies that existed outside the base's compromised grid. She was operating dark, invisible to their systems, unknown to their protocols. Just the way she needed to be. The targeting optics flickered as they picked up movement along the ridgeline, subtle, disciplined, and nearly invisible to standard surveillance. Mira adjusted the contrast and magnification, revealing what the base's advanced systems had missed. Dozens of fighters moving into position, their approach masked by the terrain and the distraction to the south. The predictive model chimed softly, indicating optimal positioning for defensive fire. Mira reached for the targeting controls, her fingers hovering over switches that most soldiers had never seen activated. The MSPAD was one of the few weapons equipped with experimental threat prediction technology, capabilities that had been deemed too unreliable for regular deployment. Too unreliable for men who couldn't understand its implications. Mira activated the targeting array and watched as the weapon system synchronized with her prediction algorithm. The pattern she'd discovered weeks ago now flowed through the MSPAD's mechanical systems, creating a perfect defensive posture against the approaching force. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to outmatch the enemy's numbers, she would disrupt their carefully coordinated assault pattern. The attack would collapse under the weight of its own confusion, leaving the fighters exposed and vulnerable. But it had to be done from exactly the right position, at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right targeting sequence. Mira adjusted the weapon's elevation and traversed the barrel toward the most critical approach path. The MSPAD hummed as it tracked her movements, But the Echo block was built for punishment. Unlike the delicate computer-dependent defense systems that dominated modern military doctrine, this machine could handle stress that would tear apart lesser weapons. At optimal targeting position, she activated the final sequence. The prediction system powered up with a sound like humming metal, and the auxiliary display showed threat patterns flowing across the ridgeline like ripples in a tactical pond. The algorithm calculated trajectories and timing windows with mathematical precision, guiding the defensive fire toward its most effective targets. Below, the base's southern defenses began to convulse as officers realized something was wrong. Mira could see the effects even from this position: emergency signals flashing, vehicles racing to reposition, the entire facility writhing in tactical agony as two opposing threat assessments fought for dominance. The enemy's deception was fighting back, trying to maintain the illusion of a southern attack. But Mira had anticipated this. She'd spent weeks analyzing their patterns, mapping their responses, learning their weaknesses. She knew exactly how they would react to her intervention, and she knew exactly how to destroy their plan. The first fighters appeared at the tree line, moving with the practiced discipline of experienced combatants. Mira felt a moment of cold clarity as the MSPAD's targeting reticle settled on the lead element. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, and the hydraulic systems whined with the strain of rapid adjustment. But the old weapon held together. Like its operator, it was built for the impossible. The M-SPAD roared to life, its suppressive fire striking the enemy's advance elements with devastating accuracy. Every burst hit exactly where the algorithm predicted fighters would be, not where they were, anticipating movement patterns seconds before they occurred. The ridgeline erupted in chaos as the carefully coordinated assault disintegrated. Fighters who expected to meet minimal resistance instead found themselves caught in precision fire that seemed to anticipate their every move. Communication broke down as unit leaders tried to adjust to a defense that shouldn't have existed. And in the sudden confusion that followed, Mira heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the base alarm finally blaring for the northern perimeter. The real threat had been recognized, but only after she had already disrupted it. The command center erupted in chaos as surveillance finally detected the northern attack. Mira watched from her position as officers scrambled to understand what was happening. Emergency signals flashed and vehicles raced toward the north wall, their headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. She had done it. The enemy's deception was broken. The attack pattern was disrupted, and the base's forces were finally responding to the real threat. But Mira wasn't finished yet. The M-SPAD continued its relentless defense, each burst of fire guided by the prediction algorithm's uncanny accuracy. The weapon seemed to anticipate every enemy movement, every attempt to regroup, every effort to establish new attack patterns. Mira's radio crackled with sudden activity as the base command realized someone was operating the northern defenses. Captain Reynolds' voice cut through the confusion like a blade. "Northern perimeter, this is command. I want identification on that weapon system immediately. Who authorized activation of the mothballed equipment?" Mira smiled. After 3 years of dismissal and condescension, Reynolds was about to get a lesson in respect. She keyed her radio and spoke in the calm, professional tone she'd perfected during countless crisis situations. "Command, this is Combat Medic Patel at the Northern Defense Bunker. Engaging enemy forces on the ridge with the M-SPAD system. Request additional ammunition and support." The silence that followed was deafening. Mira could imagine the confusion in the command center as officers tried to understand how a combat medic had identified a threat their entire surveillance network had missed, activated a weapon system no one remembered existed, and was now single-handedly holding off what appeared to be the main enemy assault. "Patel, identify yourself immediately," came the sharp response. "You are not authorized to operate defensive weapons." "Command, this is Combat Medic Patel. I'm responding to an imminent threat to the base. The northern ridge is the main attack vector, not the southern distraction. Request immediate reinforcement. Another long silence. Then Reynolds' voice, tight with barely controlled rage. Patel, you are ordered to stand down and explain your unauthorized use of restricted equipment. You are in violation of numerous regulations and will be placed under arrest. Mira maintained her fire, the base growing more secure with each passing minute. She could see response teams finally moving into proper defensive positions, vehicles establishing a perimeter, and heavy weapons being repositioned to face the real threat. Captain Reynolds, this is Combat Medic Patel. I have successfully disrupted the main enemy assault force. All units should focus on securing the northern perimeter. The southern artillery is a diversion. The radio crackled with interference. Then Reynolds' voice returned, each word precisely articulated with fury. Patel, you are ordered to cease fire and surrender that weapon immediately. Security personnel are en route to your position. Mira checked her ammunition counter and calculated the remaining threat. The M-SPAD had enough rounds for another 20 minutes of sustained fire, but she didn't need that long. The most important part of her mission was already complete. The enemy's deception had been exposed, and the base was finally responding to the real threat. Command, I'm tracking multiple enemy positions still active on the ridge. I need to maintain suppressive fire until reinforcements arrive. It wasn't strictly true. The enemy forces were already in disarray, but it was a tactical reality that trumped all other considerations. The command center had no choice but to allow her to continue until the threat was neutralized. Mira could hear the frustration in the controller's voice as he acknowledged, his professional training overriding the chaos of the situation. The M-SPAD thundered with mechanical precision, its targeting solutions growing more accurate as the prediction algorithm refined its understanding of the enemy movement patterns. Mira felt a cold satisfaction as the attack force began to withdraw. Their carefully planned assault shattered by a weapon they hadn't known existed, operated by a person they had never considered a threat. 20 minutes later, the ridge was clear. Firebase Echo's entire command structure was moving into proper defensive positions. Security vehicles surrounded the northern perimeter, their lights sweeping the mountainside. In the darkness, troops moved with renewed purpose, establishing fields of fire and communication networks. And in the center of it all, Captain Reynolds stood with his arms crossed, his face visible even in the harsh glare of the emergency lighting. Mira powered down the M-SPAD and secured its systems. The mountain air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and cordite. She removed her helmet and climbed down from the platform with the unhurried precision of a soldier who had just completed a routine defense. Reynolds was waiting for her at the bottom of the bunker steps, flanked by 2 security officers. His face was purple with rage and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. Patel, he snarled. You are under arrest for unauthorized use of restricted equipment, violation of the chain of command, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Captain, Mira interrupted, her voice calm and professional. I need to brief you on the tactical situation. The enemy force has been disrupted, but they'll regroup within hours. I have detailed analysis on their likely next tactical situation. Stevens stared at her in disbelief. You abandoned your medical post and operated a weapon system without authorization. You could have been killed. You could have caused friendly fire incidents. Sir, Mira said, pulling a folded tactical assessment from her pocket. I believe you'll find everything was conducted according to proper protocols. The M-SPAD was the only weapon capable of engaging the enemy from this position. The mission was necessary to prevent the base from being overrun. She handed him the report, noting how his hand shook as he took it. Around them, the crowd of personnel had grown quiet, listening to the exchange with obvious fascination. Reynolds scanned the document, his face growing paler with each page. The report was flawless, detailed tactical analysis, precise engagement, parameters, and most importantly, documentation of the enemy deception that had nearly succeeded in overwhelming the base. "This is," he began, then stopped. "How did you?" "I studied behavioral analysis and tactical prediction before joining the army, sir. I understand combat patterns and knew how to counter them. The base is now secure, and all units are repositioning for proper defense." The captain looked up from the report, his expression caught between fury and bewilderment. "Patel, even if this is accurate, you had no authorization to—" "Sir," Mira said, her voice carrying just a hint of steel, "I believe you'll find that Combat Medic Patel has full authorization for emergency defense measures during imminent threats. It's in my service profile." She pulled out her official assignment document and handed it to Reynolds. The document was 18 months old, but the language was clear. She was cross-trained in both medical and defensive operations, authorized to take necessary measures to protect the base in emergency situations. Reynolds read the orders twice, his face growing redder with each pass. Around them, the crowd of personnel watched in fascination as the captain realized he was trapped by his own bureaucracy. "Sir," Mira said quietly, "I respectfully request permission to assist with casualty assessment and treatment. The enemy managed to inflict some injuries before their attack was disrupted." The colonel's voice came from behind them, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Captain Reynolds, a word." Colonel Harding had appeared at the edge of the perimeter, her silver-streaked hair visible beneath her helmet. Reynolds stumbled toward her, his face pale and his hands shaking. As he passed Mira, he whispered venomously, "This isn't over, Patel. You think you're so smart, but, Captain—" The colonel's voice cut through his threat like a blade. "Report to the command center immediately and prepare a full situation analysis. I want to know how our entire surveillance network missed a major enemy force." Reynolds fled toward the command center, leaving Mira alone with the colonel. The older woman approached, her eyes taking in the MSPAD platform and the scattered enemy equipment on the ridge beyond. "Combat Medic Patel," she said simply, "walk with me." The colonel's office felt like a courtroom as Mira stood at attention. Before the field desk, Colonel Harding sat behind it, her weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays, while Captain Reynolds stood rigidly by the window like a man awaiting sentencing. The tactical assessment lay open between them, its pages filled with movement diagrams and prediction data that the captain clearly struggled to comprehend. "Combat Medic Patel," Colonel Harding began, her voice carrying the authority of 25 years in forward combat zones. "What you did tonight was either the most brilliant piece of battlefield intuition I've seen in my career or the most reckless violation of chain of command in the history of this firebase." Mira maintained her position at attention, her expression neutral despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. "Ma'am, I stand by my actions and my tactical assessment." Captain Reynolds turned to face her. "Colonel, this woman abandoned her medical post and operated a restricted weapons system without authorization. The fact that she claims to have predicted an attack doesn't excuse—" "Captain," the colonel interrupted, "I've had our intelligence teams analyze her prediction model for the past hour. Every calculation is correct. Every tactical assessment is accurate. The enemy deception she describes would have overwhelmed our defenses within minutes." She stood and walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of Mira. "The question is, Combat Medic Patel, why didn't you bring this information to your superiors through proper channels?" Mira met the colonel's gaze steadily. "I tried, ma'am. I presented my analysis to Captain Reynolds and his team 3 times today. Each time I was dismissed without consideration. My warnings about the northern attack were ignored, and I was told to return to my medical duties." "She's lying," Reynolds protested. "Patel never presented any formal tactical analysis. She made vague claims about movement patterns and theoretical models. There was no actionable intelligence." Colonel Harding turned to Reynolds, her expression hardening. "Captain, I have the communications logs from this afternoon's briefing. Would you like me to review them?" Reynolds' face went pale. "Ma'am, what I heard," the colonel continued, "was a qualified specialist attempting to brief her superiors on an imminent threat, only to be dismissed and ridiculed. I heard officers more concerned with maintaining their preconceptions than listening to potentially vital information." Mira remained silent, but she felt a surge of vindication. For 3 years, she had endured dismissal and condescension from men who couldn't see past her gender and medical insignia. Now, finally, someone was listening. "Furthermore," Colonel Harding continued, "I've reviewed Combat Medic Patel's personnel file. She has advanced degrees in behavioral analysis and tactical prediction from Georgetown, 3 years of specialized training in enemy pattern recognition, and clearance for strategic assessment projects. She is, by any reasonable measure, qualified to comment on tactical matters affecting this base." Reynolds opened his mouth to protest, but the colonel silenced him with a look. "Captain, you will submit a written explanation of why you failed to investigate Patel's warnings. You will also recommend appropriate disciplinary action for the officers who participated in dismissing her analysis." The room fell silent, except for the distant thump of security patrols securing the perimeter. Mira could see the wheels turning in Reynolds' mind as he realized the implications of the colonel's words. His career, his reputation, his entire future in the Army hung in the balance. "Now," Colonel Harding said, returning to her desk, "let's discuss the matter of the unauthorized weapons operation. Combat Medic Patel, you activated a mothballed MSPAD system without proper authorization. How do you justify this action?" Mira straightened her shoulders. "Ma'am, the MSPAD was the only defensive system positioned to engage the Northern Attack Force. Modern targeting platforms were all focused south, following the enemy's deception. I used the only tool available to disrupt their assault pattern. And you felt qualified to operate this weapon system?" "Yes, ma'am. I have current certification for the MSPAD platform with over 150 hours of logged training time. My last proficiency assessment was 4 months ago." Colonel Harding consulted a file on her desk. "Indeed you do. In fact, your weapons proficiency shows exceptional ratings in all categories. Why weren't you assigned to a combat role?" Mira hesitated for a moment, then decided on honesty. "Ma'am, I was told that my skills were better utilized in medical support." Captain Reynolds indicated that combat operations were not an appropriate role for someone of my background. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Colonel Harding's eyes fixed on Reynolds with laser intensity. "Captain, did you recommend against Patel's assignment to combat operations?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I felt that her medical expertise was more valuable in a support capacity. We needed qualified personnel for casualty treatment. And you decided that a soldier with exceptional tactical ratings and advanced analytical qualifications should be relegated to bandaging wounds." The colonel's voice was deadly quiet. "Captain, are you familiar with the Army's personnel utilization policies?" "Yes, ma'am. But you never what?" "Never considered that a female analyst might be as capable as her male counterparts? Never thought that tactical expertise and medical skills might be complementary rather than mutually exclusive?" Mira watched Reynolds crumble under the colonel's withering assessment. For 3 years, she had endured his casual dismissals, his condescending remarks, his systematic exclusion from meaningful operations. Now finally, someone with real authority was holding him accountable. "Colonel Harding," Mira said quietly, "I request permission to return to my medical duties. The base has casualties that require attention, and I believe I can best serve the mission in my assigned role." The colonel studied her for a long moment. "Combat Medic Patel, you just proved that you're one of the most valuable assets on this Firebase. You identified a critical threat, developed a solution and executed a defensive action that saved this entire base from being overrun. I'm not about to waste that kind of talent on routine medical duties. She turned to her computer and began typing rapidly. Effective immediately, you are promoted to Sergeant Patel and assigned to the newly created position of Tactical Analysis Specialist. You will report directly to me with authority over threat assessment and predictive defense operations for this firebase. Mira felt her knees go weak. Ma'am, Thank you, ma'am. Furthermore, the colonel continued, you will maintain your medical qualification and receive additional training on integrated defense systems. I want our tactical analysts to understand both medical and combat operations from a practical perspective. Reynolds looked like he was about to be sick. Colonel, with respect, this sets a dangerous precedent. We can't reward unauthorized actions regardless of their outcome. Colonel Harding stood and fixed Reynolds with a stare that could have melted steel. Captain, the only dangerous precedent here was your systematic dismissal of qualified personnel. Based on gender bias, that ends now. She walked to the door and opened it. Captain Reynolds, you will report to the battalion headquarters for reassignment. Sergeant Patel, congratulations on your promotion. I expect your first threat assessment. Briefing tomorrow at 0800. Reynolds stumbled toward the door, his face pale and his hands shaking. As he passed Mira, he whispered venomously, "This isn't over. Patel, you think you're so..." "Captain." Colonel Harding's voice cut through his threat like a blade. "That's Sergeant Patel to you, and I suggest you focus on preparing your transfer. Report rather than making threats against my personnel." Reynolds fled the office, leaving Mira alone with the colonel. The older woman returned to her desk and smiled for the first time during the meeting. "Sergeant Patel, between you and me, this firebase has needed someone like you for a long time. Too many of our officers think that loud voices and bravado make up for a lack of actual expertise." Mira felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she forced them back. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Now about that SPAD system. I'm recommending it for restoration to active status with you as its primary tactical operator. We clearly need defense systems that can function independently of our surveillance network." "Ma'am, that's not necessary. I'm happy to serve in whatever capacity." "Sergeant," the colonel interrupted with a slight smile, "I think you've proven that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Your combination of analytical expertise and practical skills is exactly what modern warfare needs." Mira saluted crisply. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am." As she left the office, Mira could hear the sounds of normal base operations resuming. Outside, patrols moved with renewed purpose. Communication systems buzzed with activity, and the steady rhythm of a secure perimeter replaced the chaos of near disaster. The enemy's deception had failed, the northern ridge was clear, and for the first time in years she felt like she truly belonged. 3 months later, Mira stood on the observation platform of the new Tactical Analysis Center, watching as the latest batch of recruits practiced defensive drills along the perimeter. The facility hummed with activity, analysts monitoring movement patterns, specialists studying enemy tactics, and combat teams learning to integrate traditional fighting skills with predictive defense technology. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the SPAD mounted in its dedicated emplacement, its metal housing gleaming in the morning sun. The old weapon system had been completely restored, its mechanisms upgraded with the latest targeting electronics while retaining its manual controls and independent operation. It was a perfect marriage of old and new, much like the woman who had saved the base with it, Sergeant Patel. A young corporal approached with a tablet in her hands. "The morning threat assessment is ready for your review." Mira smiled at the fresh-faced recruit. Corporal Anaya Singh was one of 8 female soldiers who had been assigned to the Tactical Analysis Center in the past 3 months. Word had spread throughout the region about the firebase, that was actually utilizing its female personnel effectively, and applications had poured in from qualified women who had been underutilized at other installations. Thank you, Singh. How are the new prediction models performing? Excellently, Sergeant. The behavioral analysis system you designed has identified 4 potential attack preparations this week, all of which were neutralized before they could affect base operations. Mira nodded with satisfaction. The tactical prediction model had been refined and integrated into the base's standard security protocols, creating multiple layers of threat detection that were virtually impossible to circumvent. Other firebases were already requesting copies of the system, and Mira had been invited to brief senior officers at Central Command. Sergeant Patel, another voice called from across the room. Lieutenant Davis approached with what looked suspiciously like humility. Since the incident 3 months ago, his attitude toward Mira had undergone a complete transformation. The cocky dismissal had been replaced by genuine respect, and he had become one of her most reliable supporters. What can I do for you, Lieutenant? I wanted to discuss the joint training exercise scheduled for next week. The combat teams are requesting additional instruction on pattern recognition techniques. They've realized that over-reliance on surveillance systems can be a vulnerability. Mira hid a smile. The lessons she had taught with the MSPAD had resonated throughout the entire firebase. Soldiers who had once scorned analytical approaches were now eagerly learning skills that combined intuition with systematic threat assessment. Set up a series of training scenarios using the prediction models, she said. I'll work with each team individually to develop their analytical skills. And Lieutenant, make sure they understand that this isn't just about backup systems. Sometimes, the old ways of thinking are more reliable than the new ones. Davis nodded earnestly. Understood, Sergeant. I'll schedule the first session for tomorrow morning. As he walked away, Mira reflected on how much had changed since that night 3 months ago. Captain Reynolds had been reassigned to a logistics position at a rear echelon base. His career effectively ended by the investigation into his personnel practices. Several other officers who had participated in the systematic exclusion of qualified women had been disciplined or transferred. The firebase's culture had undergone a fundamental shift toward merit-based evaluation rather than gender-based assumptions. But the most important change was invisible to casual observation. Throughout the region, the story of Sergeant Patel and her one-woman defense had become legend. Women in tactical and combat roles found their recommendations taken more seriously, their expertise respected more readily, their contributions valued more highly. The ripple effects of that single act of defiance were still spreading. Sergeant Patel, Colonel Harding's voice came from behind her. Mira turned to see the base commander approaching with a satisfied expression. I wanted to personally deliver some news. Central Command has approved your recommendation for the Advanced Tactical Prediction Program. You'll be teaching the next generation of defense specialists. Mira felt a surge of pride and anticipation. Thank you, ma'am. When do I report? Next month. But first, you have one more assignment here. The General of Forward Operations is visiting next week to observe our tactical analysis systems. She specifically requested a demonstration of your prediction model's capabilities. The irony was perfect. A year ago, Mira had been dismissed as a combat medic whose opinions didn't matter. Now the highest levels of military leadership were seeking her expertise. I'll make sure everything is perfect, ma'am. Colonel Harding smiled. I know you will, you always do. As the colonel walked away, Mira returned her attention to the window. In the distance, she could see a patrol moving along the ridgeline, their movements precise and alert. They were impressive soldiers, representing the best of modern military training. But mounted in its emplacement below, the MSPAD waited patiently for its next operation. No computer assistance, no network connectivity, no digital dependencies, just a soldier, a weapon, and the vast mountains above. Mira touched the sergeant's stripes on her uniform and smiled. Sometimes the most important victories weren't won through overwhelming force or advanced technology. Sometimes they were won by quiet persistence, unshakable conviction, and the courage to act when everyone else said it was impossible. The enemy's deception had been broken. The firebase was secure, and the defense belonged to those who truly understood it. The walking weakness had become the guardian, and the system had learned to trust the human touch. As she watched the morning sun climb higher over the mountains, Mira Patel knew that she had found her place in the world, not as a support medic relegated to the shadows, but as a leader, a teacher, and a defender who had proven that expertise and determination could overcome any obstacle. The echo of her solitary stand would continue to resonate for years to come, inspiring others to trust their instincts, value their knowledge, and never accept dismissal from those too blind to see their true worth. Sometimes the most important battles happen in isolation, guided only by the certainty that what you're doing is right. And sometimes that's exactly when the sky opens up and shows you where you truly belong. Sometimes the most extraordinary acts happen in silence. Mira was never asked to lead, never invited to speak, and never given a place in the defense she helped protect. But she knew what the system had forgotten. She trusted her own expertise. And when everything else failed, she climbed alone into an abandoned weapon, followed patterns no one else could see, and saved the firebase from outside its limits. She didn't break protocol to be noticed. She did it because she was right. This story is not just about combat. It is about quiet conviction, about the discipline to act when unseen, and the strength to never wait for permission. In a world that often overlooks those who speak in data instead of volume, her story reminds us that courage does not need approval. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Heroes community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. The first rays of dawn painted the mountains in hues of amber and gold as Mira completed her morning run around the firebase perimeter. 6 months had passed since that fateful night, when she'd single-handedly disrupted an enemy assault that would have overwhelmed Firebase Echo. The crisp mountain air filled her lungs as she pushed herself up the final incline, her muscles burning with the effort, but her mind clear and focused. This daily ritual had become more than just physical training. It was her time to observe the surrounding terrain with fresh eyes, to notice subtle changes in the landscape that sophisticated surveillance systems might miss. The human element that no algorithm could replicate. At the highest point of the perimeter, Mira paused, her breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air. Below her, Firebase Echo was coming to life. Soldiers moved with purpose between structures. Morning patrols departed through reinforced gates, and the new Tactical Analysis Center gleamed in the early light, its communication arrays scanning the mountains for threats both seen and unseen. It was a transformed base in every sense. Where once there had been arrogance and rigid thinking, now there was adaptability and respect for diverse expertise. Where once there had been blind reliance on technology, now there was a harmonious integration of human intuition and advanced systems. And at the center of this transformation stood a woman once dismissed as a walking weakness. Mira checked her watch, 0600 hours. In 2 hours, she would brief General Eleanor Winters, the commander of all forward operations in the region. The visit represented more than just a routine inspection. It was official recognition of the revolutionary threat prediction system that had been born from necessity and defiance. As she jogged down toward the base, Mira's mind turned to the journey that had brought her here. Not just the dramatic confrontation. 3 months ago, but the years of quietly building expertise while being systematically underestimated. The countless hours studying enemy tactics while her male counterparts dismissed her insights. The patience of knowing her moment would come if she persisted. That patience had been rewarded beyond anything she could have imagined. "Morning, Sergeant Patel," called a voice as she reached the main gate. Specialist Torres, one of the gate guards, offered a crisp salute. "Perimeter secure?" It was a running joke between them, the idea that Mira's morning runs were actually tactical reconnaissance missions. But like many jokes, it contained a core of truth. She noticed things during these runs that often became critical intelligence. "All clear, Torres," she replied with a smile. "Though there's increased activity in the eastern ravine. Probably just local herders, but tell the morning patrol to verify." "Yes, Sergeant," Torres replied, immediately noting the information in the security log without question or hesitation. This, too, was part of the transformation. Her observations were no longer dismissed, but acted upon with immediate respect. Mira continued toward her quarters, passing the medical bunker where she had once been confined to treating injuries and dispensing medication. The staff there waved in greeting, no hint of the old condescension in their expressions. Her dual expertise in both medicine and tactical analysis had become a model for the entire base, with cross-training now a standard part of personnel development. After a quick shower and change into her uniform, Mira made her way to the mess hall. The morning bustle paused momentarily as she entered, not out of disrespect, but a subtle acknowledgement of her presence. She had become something of a legend among the newer recruits, though she worked hard to downplay the stories that circulated about her. Solitary stand against overwhelming odds. "Seats open, Sergeant," called Lieutenant Kamara from a table near the center of the hall. The young intelligence officer had arrived just 2 months ago, part of the wave of female personnel who had requested transfer to Firebase Echo after word spread of its transformation. Mira collected her breakfast and joined Kamara, who was reviewing data on a tablet while she ate. "Morning briefing looks interesting," Kamara said by way of greeting. "Satellite imagery confirms what your prediction model flagged yesterday. There's movement in the Western Passage that doesn't match normal patterns." "Local displacement or potential hostiles?" Mira asked, her mind immediately analyzing possibilities. "That's the fascinating part," Kamara replied, sliding the tablet across the table. "Your model says hostile, but all other intelligence indicators suggest civilian. I've been trying to reconcile the discrepancy." Mira studied the data, recognizing the subtle pattern discrepancies that had triggered her algorithm's warning. This was the next evolution of her work, teaching others to see what she saw, to recognize the almost imperceptible variations that separated routine activity from potential threats. "Look at the movement timing," she said, pointing to a sequence of timestamps. "Civilians in this region move with the sun to avoid exposure during the hottest parts of the day. These movements are precisely timed regardless of weather conditions. That's tactical discipline, not civilian behavior." Kamara's eyes widened with understanding. "I see it now. They're trying to mimic civilian patterns, but they're too precise, too mechanical." "Exactly," Mira said with satisfaction. "Have a drone make a wide area survey with thermal imaging at 0900. If I'm right, they'll have equipment caches that will show distinctive heat signatures compared to civilian goods." The lieutenant nodded, making notes. "I'll coordinate with air assets immediately. And Sergeant, thank you. I wouldn't have caught this." "You would have," Mira assured her. "It just takes time to train your eye. The patterns are always there. We just need to learn to see them." This was perhaps the most meaningful change of all. Not just that Mira's own expertise was now valued, but that she was actively passing that knowledge to a new generation of analysts who would never face the barriers she had overcome. After breakfast, Mira made her way to the Tactical Analysis Center, the facility that had been constructed specifically to house her prediction systems and the team she now led. The building hummed with purposeful activity as analysts monitored screens displaying everything from drone feeds to complex pattern-matching algorithms. "Sergeant Patel," called Corporal Singh, approaching with a tablet. Final preparations for the general's visit are complete. The demonstration scenario is loaded and ready for your review. Mira took the tablet, scanning the meticulously prepared demonstration that would showcase the full capabilities of her prediction model. It was a simulation based on the actual attack she had thwarted 6 months ago, but with additional complexities added to highlight the system's advanced capabilities. "Excellent work, Singh," she said. "But let's add one more element. I want to demonstrate how the system can adapt when the enemy changes tactics mid-operation." "You mean like when you had to adjust targeting parameters during the actual defense?" Singh asked, her eyes bright with interest. "Exactly," Mira confirmed. "The point isn't just that the system can predict attacks, it's that it can evolve in real time as conditions change. That's the human-machine integration that makes this approach unique." As Singh hurried off to implement the changes, Colonel Harding appeared at Mira's side. The base commander had become her strongest advocate, ensuring that the innovations born from that desperate night received proper attention and resources. "Ready for the general?" Harding asked, her weathered face showing rare signs of anticipation. Mira was touched by the earnest admission. That might be the most important lesson in all of this. The patterns that matter most are often the ones we're trained to overlook. As the gathering dispersed and preparations began for the general's departure, Mira took a moment to walk back to the northern perimeter where it had all begun. The M-SPAD stood in its emplacement, a tangible reminder of that desperate night when she had trusted her own judgment above all else. Colonel Harding joined her there, the two women standing in comfortable silence for a moment before the colonel spoke. "When I first reviewed the security footage from that night, do you know what impressed me most?" Mira shook her head. "It wasn't your tactical acumen, though that was exceptional. It wasn't your courage, though that was undeniable." Harding turned to face her. "It was the absolute conviction in your movements. No hesitation, no second-guessing, just the fluid efficiency of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and how to do it." "I didn't have time for doubt," Mira admitted. "Few of us do in the moments that define us," Harding replied. "The difference is that you recognized your moment when it came and had the courage to seize it." She extended her hand. "Congratulations, Captain Patel. Firebase Echo is losing an extraordinary defender, but the entire region is gaining something even more valuable." As Mira shook the colonel's hand, she felt the weight of the journey that had brought her to this point, from dismissed medic to recognized tactical expert, from walking weakness to exemplar of a new approach to warfare. The path had been neither easy nor direct, but each obstacle had only strengthened her resolve. The last light of day painted the mountains in deep purples and golds as Mira took one final look at the firebase that had transformed from a prison of limited expectations to the launching point for her unexpected future. Tomorrow she would depart for regional headquarters to begin building the Predictive Defense Initiative, taking with her the lessons learned through struggle and vindication. Some would say her story was one of overcoming bias and proving critics wrong. But Mira knew it was something simpler and more profound, the triumph of genuine expertise over artificial limitations, the victory of seeing clearly when others were blinded by preconception. In a world where strength was often measured in volume and aggression, she had demonstrated the quiet power of observation, analysis, and decisive action. Not to prove others wrong, but because lives depended on getting it right. As darkness fell over Firebase Echo, Captain Mira Patel turned toward the future she had never sought, but had earned through the most authentic form of courage, the courage to trust her own judgment when every voice of authority told her she was wrong. The so-called walking weakness had become the foundation for a new kind of strength, one that recognized that true security came not from rigid adherence to outdated thinking, but from the willingness to see patterns others missed and act on them without apology. And in that recognition lay the most important lesson of all, that protection often comes from unexpected sources, that strength wears many faces, and that sometimes the most valuable defender is the one no one thought to watch. The Kandahar Regional Command Center rose from the dusty plain like a modern fortress, its reinforced walls and communication arrays standing in stark contrast to the ancient mountains that surrounded it. 1 year had passed since Captain Mira Patel had left Firebase Echo to establish the Predictive Defense Initiative, transforming a theoretical concept into a program that was revolutionizing forward base protection throughout the region. The morning briefing room buzzed with focused energy as tactical specialists from a dozen different units prepared for the day's operations. At the center of this carefully orchestrated activity stood Mira, no longer the isolated voice struggling to be heard, but the recognized authority whose methods had already saved hundreds of lives. Movement patterns in the Koringal Valley show 3 distinct anomalies, she explained, gesturing to the high-resolution topographical display dominating the front wall. Traditional surveillance indicates normal civilian activity, but the behavioral signatures don't match established patterns. Major Richards, a grizzled special operations veteran who had initially been skeptical of Mira's methods, leaned forward with intense interest. The timing intervals are too precise, he noted, understanding immediately what had taken others months to recognize. No variation for terrain or weather conditions. Exactly, Mira confirmed, a surge of satisfaction flowing through her. This was perhaps her greatest achievement, not just implementing her predictive system, but teaching others to see what she saw, to recognize the subtle patterns that separated routine activity from deadly threat. Convoy Delta is scheduled to move through that sector in 18 hours, Lieutenant Vasquez added, concern evident in her voice. Standard surveillance protocols would clear them for passage, and they'd be walking into a perfectly executed ambush, Mira finished. Major Richards, I want your team to conduct a pattern-disruptive operation before dawn. Don't engage directly, just establish presence in these 3 locations. She marked positions on the map that seemed random to the untrained eye but would effectively shatter the enemy's carefully constructed trap. Unconventional approach, Richards commented with a hint of admiration. Instead of springing their trap, we simply make it impossible to set. Prevention over reaction, Mira replied with a small smile. Why walk into an ambush we can dismantle before it forms? As the team dispersed to implement the operation, General Winters entered the briefing room. The commander's presence still commanded immediate respect, but over the past year, a genuine partnership had formed between the 2 women, one built on mutual recognition of each other's unique capabilities. Another preemptive operation? The general asked, reviewing the tactical display. Yes, ma'am. The pattern indicators suggest a sophisticated ambush in development. Major Richards will disrupt the setup without direct engagement. General. Winters nodded approvingly. Your approach continues to prove its value, Captain. 4 major attacks prevented this month alone, without a single casualty on either side. She gestured for Mira to follow her into the adjoining strategy room, which is precisely why I've called this meeting. Inside, Mira was surprised to find 3 unfamiliar officers waiting, a colonel from NATO Strategic Command, a major from British Special Forces, and a civilian whose demeanor screamed intelligence services. The atmosphere immediately shifted, from routine to something far more significant. Captain Patel, General Winters began formally. What started as a localized defensive initiative has garnered attention at the highest levels. Your predictive methodologies have proven so effective that Strategic Command wants to implement them theater-wide. The NATO colonel stepped forward. Captain, your integration of behavioral analysis with tactical prediction represents a paradigm shift in how we approach asymmetric warfare. We've been monitoring the results of your initiative for the past 6 months, and the numbers speak for themselves. 68% reduction in successful enemy operations against protected installations. Mira felt a momentary surge of vindication, remembering the dismissive laughter that had once greeted her attempts to share these same methodologies. "Thank you, sir. The credit belongs to the entire team. We've refined the approach significantly since the initial implementation." The British major spoke next, his clipped accent contrasting with his thoughtful tone. "What interests us particularly, Captain, is not just the technological aspect, but your insistence on maintaining human analytical capability alongside the predictive algorithms. Most military innovations trend toward removing the human element." "Entirely. That would be a critical mistake," Mira replied with conviction. "The technology amplifies human insight. It doesn't replace it. Our most successful interventions have come from analysts recognizing subtle patterns that no algorithm would identify as significant." The civilian nodded, speaking for the first time. "Precisely why we're here, Captain. Strategic Command is establishing an international predictive defense academy to train specialists from coalition forces. General Winters has recommended you to develop and lead the program." The proposal was so far beyond anything Mira had imagined that she momentarily struggled to process its implications. What had begun as a desperate stand at a remote firebase had evolved into something that would transform military operations across the entire theater of operations. "This represents a significant promotion," General Winters added. "You'd be advanced to major and relocated to the Strategic Coalition headquarters in Qatar. Your team here would form the core instruction cadre." The meeting continued for another hour as details were discussed and questions addressed. When it finally concluded, Mira found herself alone with General Winters, both women contemplating the magnitude of what had just been proposed. "A lot to process," the general acknowledged, studying Mira's thoughtful expression. "It's not the promotion or the relocation," Mira admitted. "It's the scale of the opportunity. What started as a personal mission to protect one firebase has become something that could reshape how we approach conflict prevention entirely." General Winters smiled, a rare expression that had become slightly less rare during their year of collaboration. "That's how the most meaningful transformations often occur. Not from grand strategic initiatives, but from individual conviction, proven right in the crucible of necessity." Later that evening, Mira stood on the command center's observation deck, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of amber and gold. The same mountains that had once hidden enemies now served as a reminder of how perspective could shift, how threats viewed from different angles revealed patterns invisible to conventional observation. Lieutenant Vasquez joined her, offering a cup of steaming tea. The young officer had been among the first to embrace Mira's methodologies, demonstrating a natural aptitude for pattern recognition that rivaled Mira's own. "The team's talking about nothing but the International Academy," Vasquez said. "Is it true we'll all be transferring to Qatar?" Mira nodded, taking a sip of the fragrant tea. "Those who choose to come. It's a significant change from field operations, but a chance to spread these methods throughout coalition forces," Vasquez noted. "To transform how we approach protection on a global scale." The observation caught the essence of what had been cycling through Mira's thoughts all afternoon. Her journey had never been about personal advancement or recognition. It had been about proving that different perspectives, especially those traditionally dismissed, often held the key to solving seemingly insurmountable challenges. "Have I ever told you about the night at Firebase Echo?" Mira asked suddenly. "Not the official version, but what was actually going through my mind." Vasquez shook her head, instantly intrigued. The story had become something of a legend, repeated in variations throughout the region, but few had heard Mira's personal account of those critical hours. "Everyone assumes I acted out of some extraordinary courage," Mira said, gazing toward the mountains. "But the truth is simpler and more complicated. I acted because I was absolutely certain of what I saw, even when every authority figure insisted I was wrong." She turned to face the younger officer. That's the real lesson in all of this, Vasquez. Not the technical methodology or the prediction algorithms. It's the understanding that expertise doesn't require external validation to be real. That sometimes the most valuable insight comes from perspectives that don't match the established viewpoint. Vasquez considered this. Is that why you insist that our teams include people from such diverse backgrounds? Not just different military specialties, but different cultures, different thinking styles? Exactly, Mira confirmed. The patterns that matter most are often the ones we're trained to overlook. Every unique perspective brings the possibility of seeing what others miss. The next morning dawned with a clarity that seemed symbolic of the path ahead. Mira arrived at the command center earlier than usual, using the quiet hours to finalize her acceptance of the new position and outline her vision for the International Academy. As she worked, her mind returned to the journey that had brought her to this point. From the combat medic dismissed as a walking weakness, to the captain whose methodologies were now being adopted at the highest strategic levels, the path had been neither direct nor easy, but each obstacle had ultimately strengthened both her resolve and her approach. The command center gradually filled with personnel as the day shift arrived. Among them was a face Mira hadn't expected to see. Captain Reynolds, her former commanding officer from Firebase Echo, the man who had once confined her to the medical bunker and dismissed her tactical warnings. Their eyes met across the operations floor, Reynolds' expression a complex mixture of discomfort and resignation. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, standing stiffly before her desk. "Captain Patel," he acknowledged formally. "I've been assigned to Regional Command as liaison for Southern Firebase operations." "Captain Reynolds," Mira replied neutrally. "Welcome to Kandahar." An awkward silence followed, heavy with unspoken history. Reynolds cleared his throat. "I understand congratulations are in order. Word of your promotion and new assignment is already circulating." "Thank you," Mira said simply, waiting to see where this unexpected encounter would lead. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not just for Firebase Echo, but for the 3 years before that. I was wrong about you. Wrong about your capabilities. Wrong about a lot of things." The admission was so unexpected that Mira took a moment to respond. "I appreciate that, Captain. But this was never about personal vindication." "I know," he acknowledged. "That's what makes it worse, in a way. While I was focused on maintaining authority and traditional approaches, you were simply trying to protect the base using expertise I refused to recognize." Mira studied him, seeing past the discomfort to the genuine realization beneath. "The methodologies we've developed here aren't about replacing traditional approaches, Captain. They're about expanding our perspective, integrating different viewpoints to see threats more completely." "So I've been told," Reynolds replied. "That's actually why I requested this assignment. I want to understand the systems you've developed, to learn what I failed to see before." In that moment, Mira recognized an opportunity more meaningful than any promotion or commendation. The chance to transform an adversarial relationship into a demonstration of the very principle at the heart of her work, that diverse perspectives, properly integrated, created stronger protection than any single approach. "My team conducts training sessions every morning at 0800, she said. "You're welcome to join, not as an observer, but as a participant. Your experience in traditional tactical assessment would be valuable to the group." Reynolds looked surprised, clearly having expected continued resentment rather than inclusion. "I'd appreciate that opportunity," he said with genuine gratitude. As he walked away, Lieutenant Vasquez approached, having witnessed the exchange. "That was unexpected," she commented. "Isn't he the officer who dismissed my warnings and confined me to the medical bunker?" "Yes," Mira confirmed. "And now he's here to learn our methodologies." "That must be satisfying," Vasquez observed. Seeing him acknowledge he was wrong, Mira considered this. The satisfaction isn't in proving him wrong, Lieutenant. It's in seeing that even the most entrenched perspectives can evolve when presented with compelling evidence. That's the true measure of our success, not that I was right, but that the approach itself has proven so effective that even its strongest critics now want to understand it. The following week passed in a blur of preparation as Mira balanced her current operational responsibilities with planning for the International Academy. Her team would form the core instruction cadre, bringing their practical experience to a program that would train specialists from a dozen different nations. On her final evening before departing for Qatar, Mira found herself once again on the observation deck, watching darkness fall over the mountains that had defined so much of her military experience. The air carried the scent of distant rain, a rarity in this arid region. General Winters joined her there, both women standing in companionable silence for several minutes before the general spoke. When I first reviewed the reports from Firebase Echo, I thought I was reading about an exceptional but isolated incident, she said reflectively. One officer's moment of clarity in a crisis situation. I never imagined it would lead to this. A fundamental recalibration of how we approach defensive operations across the entire theater. Mira smiled slightly. Neither did I, ma'am. I was just trying to protect one firebase on one night. But that's how genuine transformation usually begins, the general observed. Not from grand strategic initiatives, but from someone seeing clearly what others have missed, and having the courage to act on that vision despite opposition. She turned to face Mira directly. What you've created here goes beyond tactical methodology. Captain, soon to be Major Patel, you've demonstrated that the most effective defense comes from integrating diverse perspectives, from valuing insights regardless of their source, from building systems that enhance human judgment rather than replacing it. That's the foundation I want to build the Academy on, Mira confirmed. Not just teaching the technical aspects of predictive defense, but cultivating the ability to recognize valuable insights wherever they emerge, especially from unexpected sources. General Winters nodded approvingly. You've turned what could have been a personal grievance into a transformative approach that's saving lives daily. That's a rare achievement, and one that explains why Strategic Command was so unanimous in their selection. As darkness settled over the command center, Mira reflected on the journey that had brought her to this threshold. From the isolated combat medic struggling to be heard to the architect of a program that would reshape coalition defense strategy. The path had been neither direct nor easy, but each challenge had ultimately contributed to both her methodology and her resolve. The following morning, as Mira prepared to board the transport that would take her to Qatar, she was surprised to find the entirety of her predictive defense team gathered on the tarmac. They stood in formation, a visual testament to how far the initiative had grown from its humble beginnings. Analysts and tactical specialists from diverse military backgrounds, united by a shared commitment to seeing beyond conventional perspectives. Lieutenant Vasquez stepped forward, presenting Mira with a small wooden box. Inside lay a piece of the original MSPAD weapon system from Firebase Echo, mounted on a simple plaque with an inscription. Sometimes the clearest vision comes from standing alone. Mira felt unexpected emotion as she accepted the gift, recognizing its perfect symbolism. Her journey had begun in isolation, the solitary figure trusting her own analysis when every authority dismissed it. But it had culminated in community, a diverse team united by shared methodology, but strengthened by their different perspectives. This isn't an ending, she told the assembled team. It's an evolution. What we've built here will now spread throughout coalition forces, transforming how we approach protection on a global scale. As the transport lifted off, carrying her toward the next chapter of this unexpected journey, Mira watched the landscape of Afghanistan recede beneath her. The same mountains that had once hidden threats now appeared in a different light. Not as obstacles, but as reminders that perspective shapes perception, that what seems impenetrable from one angle reveals clear pathways from another. The woman once dismissed as a walking weakness had transformed not just her own circumstances but the fundamental approach to protection throughout the region. Not through extraordinary heroics, but through the simple, profound courage of trusting her own expertise when every voice of authority insisted she was wrong. And in that transformation lay a truth more powerful than any weapon system or prediction algorithm, that sometimes the most valuable defender is the one no one thought to recognize, that the clearest vision often comes from perspectives traditionally dismissed, and that protection in its truest form begins with the courage to see clearly and act decisively, even when standing entirely alone. As the mountains disappeared beneath the clouds, Major Mira Patel opened her laptop and began refining her vision for the International Predictive Defense Academy, an institution that would carry forward not just a methodology, but a philosophy. That strength lies in diversity of perspective, that expertise deserves recognition regardless of its source, and that sometimes the most important patterns are the ones visible only to those who see differently. Sometimes the most extraordinary acts begin in silence. Mira was never invited to lead, never expected to transform, and never given permission to revolutionize the very concept of protection. But she understood what systems of authority often forget, that genuine expertise requires no external validation, that vision becomes clearest when conventional perspectives fail, and that true security emerges not from rigid adherence to established doctrine, but from the courage to see what others miss and act on that insight without apology. She didn't defy authority to prove a point. She did it because lives depended on someone seeing clearly when systems of power had become blind to emerging threats. This story is not just about military innovation. It is about the transformative power of perspective, about the courage to trust your own expertise when every voice of authority dismisses it, and about the remarkable change that can emerge from a single moment of clarity. In a world that often overlooks voices that don't match the expected pattern, Mira's journey reminds us that sometimes the greatest contribution comes from seeing differently. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.